Every single one of us has two versions of ourselves. There's the version that doubts, that hesitates, that clings to comfort. And then there's the version that dreams big, pushes limits, and stands tall in the face of adversity. The problem is, we often let the weaker version, the version rooted in fear, dictate our action. But here's the thing, greatness doesn't happen in the comfort zone. It happens when we're willing to confront that weaker self and say, your time is up. Tonight, I'm not asking you to fight anyone else. I'm not asking you to take on the world. I'm asking you to confront the hardest battle of all, the one inside yourself. Because when you kill that weaker person within you, you make space for strength, resilience, and the life you truly deserve. Let's talk about how we do that, step by step, starting now. Every person carries within them a duality, two distinct versions of themselves. On one side is the strong, resilient, and determined self, the part that believes in possibilities, takes risks, and relentlessly pursues growth. On the other side is the weaker self, the voice of doubt and fear, the one that clings to comfort and shies away from challenges. This weaker self isn't inherently bad, it's human. It represents the part of us that craves safety and survival, that resists anything unfamiliar or uncomfortable. The key to progress begins with acknowledging this weaker self, not ignoring it. It's the part of you that talks you out of trying something new, convinces you to procrastinate, or whispers that you aren't good enough. Recognizing it doesn't mean surrendering to it. It means giving it a name, understanding its role, and realizing when it's taking control. Too often, people deny its existence, attributing their struggles to external factors instead of admitting that the real battle is internal. And acknowledging the weaker self isn't about judgment or self-criticism, it's about awareness. It's pausing when you feel hesitation and asking yourself, who's speaking right now? My stronger self or my weaker one? It's understanding that the weaker self feeds on fear, insecurity, and complacency, and it thrives in moments when we let those emotions take the wheel. This process isn't easy, but it's essential. The weaker self can be subtle, disguising itself as rationality or self-preservation, making its presence harder to detect. But the more you bring it to light, the easier it becomes to see how it influences your decisions. By recognizing its voice, you can start to challenge it, to disrupt its patterns, and ultimately, to reduce its power over your life. The triggers that empower your weaker self are often subtle, deeply ingrained, and, at times, deceptively comforting. These triggers can take many forms: fear of failure, a need for approval, past disappointments, or even habits that seem harmless on the surface, but keep you stuck in mediocrity. To defeat your weaker self, you must first identify what activates it. It might be the moment you face criticism, and that voice inside tells you to back down, or perhaps it's when you encounter uncertainty, and instead of moving forward, you retreat to what feels familiar. Sometimes, it's as simple as comparing yourself to others and convincing yourself that you're not enough. These triggers thrive in moments of vulnerability, feeding the part of you that prefers to avoid rather than confront, to settle rather than strive. Self-awareness is the weapon against these triggers. Begin by paying attention to your reactions. What makes you hesitate? What situations cause you to give up before you even try? Once you start noticing these patterns, you'll see how often your weaker self takes over without you even realizing it. Triggers can also be external, negative influences, toxic environments, or people who fuel your doubts. Recognizing these external factors is just as crucial as understanding your internal ones. But here's the catch. Your weaker self will try to justify these triggers. It will tell you that it's just being cautious, or that you're protecting yourself. That's where the real work begins. When you can pinpoint the exact moments that weaken your resolve, you gain the power to intervene. You can stop letting those triggers dictate your actions and instead use them as a signal to lean into your stronger self. Shifting from excuses to accountability is a pivotal step in silencing your weaker self. Excuses are the fuel that keeps the weaker self alive. They disguise themselves as logical reasons. I don't have the time, it's not the right moment, or I'm not ready yet. But in reality, excuses are nothing more than barriers you create to avoid discomfort, failure, or responsibility. They're the language of stagnation, and the longer you lean on them, the further you drift from growth. Accountability, on the other hand, is the language of strength. It requires you to own your decisions, actions, and outcomes, no matter how uncomfortable that may feel. The moment you stop blaming circumstances, other people, or lack of resources, and start asking yourself, what can I do to change this, is the moment you take power back from your weaker self. This shift is not about being overly critical of yourself. It's about being honest. It's admitting that the project you haven't started isn't because of a lack of time, it's because of fear of failing. It's recognizing that the relationship you haven't repaired isn't because the other person won't change, it's because you haven't taken the first step. Accountability forces you to confront the truth. Most limitations are self-imposed. The process of embracing accountability starts small. It's about catching yourself in the act of making an excuse and replacing it with a question. What can I do differently? It's not easy because excuses often feel justified, but every time you choose accountability, you weaken the grip of your weaker self. Over time, this shift becomes second nature, and the stronger version of you begins to take the lead. Embracing discomfort as a tool for growth is one of the most powerful ways to silence your weaker self. Discomfort is the space where transformation happens, yet it's also the space your weaker self desperately tries to avoid. It whispers, "Stay here, it's safe. Why risk failure? Why endure the pain?" But growth doesn't live in safety, it lives in the challenges that stretch you, the moments that force you to adapt, and the situations that demand more than you think you can give. Discomfort isn't the enemy, it's the signal that you're moving beyond your current limits. Whether it's stepping into an unfamiliar role, confronting a fear, or pushing yourself physically, those moments of unease are where the real work begins. Think about every significant achievement in your life. Wasn't there a moment of discomfort right before the breakthrough? That's because growth and discomfort are inseparable. Your weaker self will try to convince you that discomfort equals danger, that stepping out of your comfort zone is a mistake. But the truth is, avoiding discomfort leads to stagnation. It keeps you locked in the same routines, the same patterns, and the same results. The stronger version of yourself understands that discomfort is temporary, but the growth it brings can be life-changing. To embrace discomfort, you must first reframe how you see it. Instead of running from it, lean into it. When a challenge feels overwhelming, remind yourself that this is the moment where growth begins. Treat discomfort as a teacher, not a threat. With time, what once felt impossible becomes second nature, and the stronger self emerges, ready to face even greater challenge. Focusing on small, consistent wins is one of the most effective ways to overpower your weaker self. Often, people get caught in the trap of thinking that transformation requires massive, overnight changes. This belief feeds the weaker self, which thrives on the overwhelming feeling of too much, too fast. But the truth is, progress is built through small, deliberate actions, repeated over time. Every time you take a small step forward, you're sending a message to your weaker self. I am in control. These small wins might seem insignificant in the moment, but they compound into significant results. Whether it's committing to 5 minutes of exercise, choosing to read one page of a book, or taking a single step toward a daunting goal, every small win chips away at the influence of your weaker self. Consistency is the key. The weaker self relies on inconsistency. It thrives when you start strong but falter after a few days or weeks. It tells you that skipping just one day won't matter, but it does. Consistency is about proving to yourself, day after day, that you can follow through, even when motivation fades. Small wins also build momentum. Success breeds confidence, and confidence silences doubt. Each time you achieve a minor goal, you create a positive feedback loop, reinforcing the idea that you're capable of more. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. The beauty of focusing on small wins is that it makes change manageable. You don't have to conquer your entire weaker self in one moment. Instead, you can break the battle into smaller victories, each one moving you closer to becoming the strongest version of yourself. Over time, these wins add up to a complete transformation. Surrounding yourself with people who challenge you is essential in silencing your weaker self. The people you spend the most time with have an undeniable influence on your mindset, habits, and decisions. If you're surrounded by those who enable complacency, negativity, or mediocrity, it becomes easier for your weaker self to thrive. But if you choose to be around individuals who push you, inspire you, and hold you accountable, you create an environment where your stronger self can flourish. Challenging relationships don't mean surrounding yourself with critics or harsh voices. It's about finding people who see your potential and refuse to let you settle for less. These are the friends, mentors, or colleagues who encourage you to step out of your comfort zone, who ask the hard questions, and who don't accept your excuses. They hold a mirror up to your actions, not to judge you, but to help you grow. The weaker self thrives in isolation or in circles where mediocrity is the norm. It tells you to avoid people who make you uncomfortable, who seem too intense, or who demand more from you. But the truth is, those are the people who will elevate you. They challenge you not because they want to see you struggle, but because they want to see you succeed. These individuals also model what's possible. When you're around people who set high standards, pursue their goals relentlessly, and refuse to let challenges define them, it shifts your perspective. Their energy becomes contagious, and their success becomes proof that you can do the same. Choosing to surround yourself with the right people is one of the most powerful decisions you can make. It's a decision to reject complacency, embrace growth, and let your stronger self take the lead. Replacing self-doubt with action is a decisive way to silence your weaker self. Self-doubt is the fuel that keeps your weaker self alive, whispering that you're not ready, not capable, or not deserving. It thrives in hesitation, feeding on the moments you pause to overthink or second-guess yourself. But here's the truth: self-doubt cannot survive in the presence of action. Action disrupts the cycle of doubt by shifting your focus from what if to what's next. The moment you take even a small step forward, you prove to yourself that you're capable of movement, that progress is possible despite the uncertainty. The weaker self craves inaction because it reinforces the narrative that you're stuck. But every time you act, you chip away at that story and create a new one. The key is to act before you feel ready. Waiting for confidence or clarity only gives your weaker self more time to build its case against you. Confidence doesn't precede action, it follows it. With every step you take, no matter how small, you build evidence that you're stronger than your doubts. Each decision to act becomes a vote for your stronger self. It's also important to recognize that action doesn't need to be perfect or even lead to immediate success. The goal isn't to eliminate mistakes or failures, it's to prove that you're willing to try. Even when the outcome isn't ideal, taking action teaches resilience and adaptability, skills your stronger self will rely on. By replacing self-doubt with action, you shift the narrative from "I can't" to "I can figure it out." Over time, this mindset becomes a habit, and the voice of your weaker self grows quieter with every step forward. Reframing failure as an opportunity to learn is a powerful way to weaken your weaker self. Failure is one of the biggest triggers for self-doubt, fear, and hesitation. The emotions your weaker self thrives on. It uses failure as proof that you're not good enough, that you should stop trying, or that the risk wasn't worth it. But failure, when viewed through the right lens, is not the end, it's feedback. The stronger version of you understands that failure is an essential part of growth. Every mistake, setback, or misstep holds a lesson if you're willing to look for it. Failure is not a reflection of your worth or ability. It's simply a reflection of your process. It shows you what didn't work, highlights areas for improvement, and gives you a clearer path forward. Instead of letting failure define you, let it refine you. Your weaker self sees failure as a reason to quit, but your stronger self sees it as a reason to adapt. This shift in perspective requires you to separate failure from your identity. Failing at something doesn't make you a failure, it makes you human. Everyone who has achieved anything meaningful has failed along the way, often multiple times. What separates those who succeed from those who don't is their willingness to get back up, learn, and try again. When you reframe failure, you also remove its power to paralyze you. The fear of failing often stops people from taking action altogether. But when you view it as a stepping stone rather than a roadblock, it loses its ability to hold you back. Every failure becomes a chance to grow stronger, smarter, and more resilient, making it one of your greatest tools in defeating your weaker self. Building habits that reinforce your stronger self is a critical step in overcoming your weaker self. Habits are the actions you repeat without thinking, and they shape your daily life and mindset. The good news is that you have the power to choose which habits you cultivate. When you consciously create habits that align with your goals, values, and the version of yourself you want to become, you make it easier for your stronger self to thrive. The weaker self thrives on inconsistency and impulsivity. It gets comfortable in unhealthy routines such as procrastination, negativity, or avoidance. But strong habits require discipline and intention. They don't allow the weaker self to dictate the terms of your day. Whether it's waking up early, exercising regularly, or prioritizing meaningful work over distractions, habits are the daily choices that compound into long-term success. It's essential to start small when building these habits. Trying to overhaul your entire life overnight is a recipe for overwhelm and burnout. Instead, choose one habit that will move you closer to your stronger self and commit to it daily. As you build consistency in one area, it becomes easier to add new habits, creating a snowball effect of growth. The beauty of habits is that they eventually require less conscious effort. The stronger self begins to take the wheel without needing to consciously battle the weaker self each day. When you have habits that support your goals, they act as a buffer against the doubts, fears, and distractions that try to pull you off course. Building habits isn't about perfection, it's about consistency. Over time, the small, positive habits you cultivate will become second nature, and your weaker self will have less and less influence over your choices. Celebrating progress, not perfection, is one of the most important shifts you can make in defeating your weaker self. The weaker self thrives in the gap between where you are and where you think you should be. It tells you that you're not enough because you haven't reached some idealized version of success yet. But the reality is, perfection is a myth. It's an unattainable standard that, when chased, only fuels disappointment and self-doubt. Instead of focusing on perfection, celebrate the progress you make, no matter how small it may seem. Every step forward is a victory, and each victory builds momentum. When you acknowledge your progress, you remind yourself that growth isn't a destination, it's a continuous journey. Even on days when you don't feel like you've accomplished everything you set out to do, look for the small wins. Did you show up? Did you take one step closer to your goal? Did you stay consistent even when it was hard? Those moments matter. Celebrating progress also shifts your mindset from scarcity to abundance. The weaker self often operates from a place of not enough time, not enough progress, not enough success. But by celebrating progress, you start to operate from a place of abundance, recognizing that every step forward is enough, and it's all part of the bigger picture. When you start celebrating progress, you train your mind to focus on what you're achieving rather than what you haven't yet done. This fuels your motivation, reinforces your commitment to your goals, and weakens the grip of perfectionism. Each milestone, no matter how minor, deserves recognition because it's proof that you're moving closer to becoming the person you're meant to be. As we close, remember that the battle against your weaker self is not a one-time event, but a lifelong process. It's about making intentional choices, moment by moment, that align with the person you want to become. It's about recognizing your weaker self, challenging it, and choosing to act in ways that strengthen your resolve. Every step you take, no matter how small, moves you further away from the limitations of doubt, fear, and complacency. And in its place, you create space for the strength, resilience, and confidence that define your stronger self.